Amelia, I'm going to share my slides.
Awesome, and we can see it.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much to NASW for hosting these really important discussions. Really great to give education on topics that you don't always hear about, but also through panel interaction. I think that's so important, especially topics like this, to get real live feedback and experience from people who are either personally or professionally have been exposed to this type of topic. So I appreciate NASW, but I also really appreciate our panelists for agreeing to do this workshop with you today, and with me as the moderator. So I am going to do about 20 minutes or so of slides just to set the tone and answer some of the basic definition questions. If you're attending and you know what military sexual trauma is and some of the details of that, we'll jump into the panel in about 20 minutes. But I do like to set the tone because there's so many people on, and chances are there are many who don't know even what this topic means. So we're going to start just with that. So military sexual trauma refers to sexual assault or harassment experienced during military service. So it really is like any other form of sexual trauma, but it occurs during one's time of service. So a few just points, facts, veterans of all genders and from all types of backgrounds experience MST. So I have a few statistics on that shortly with regards to males and females, but it's worth noting. And there is a strong co-occurrence between people who've experienced MST and disorders like post-traumatic stress and other diagnoses like depression, anxiety, things like that. So if you have someone in front of you, I always think of that. So I'm a clinician. Let me back up for a second. I'm a clinician. I've been in the field about 16 years working specifically with trauma survivors, people with addiction issues and first responders, right? So that's kind of where I learned the most, was from clients that I was working with and them telling me what books to read and what to learn more about. And, a lot of this you can't find in a textbook. So I'm really grateful for those experiences. And I always think when I'm doing these trainings, I want to empower clinicians out there like myself to have the tools in order to properly screen, support, refer a veteran who might be sitting in front of you presenting with something like this, where you think you might understand the concept, but after this training, maybe you'll have a better grasp and be able to really support them in a way that they need it. I think that everyone deserves good therapy, but veterans who've served our country really, if they're in your office looking for help, they deserve to get the best help possible. So that's really what drives me in the work that I do. So I hope to offer a glimpse of that with you today through the slides, but then also through the panel. So examples, just to keep in mind, we don't have to read through every single one. Everyone probably has an understanding of what sexual trauma is, right? Being pressured or coerced into sexual activities. But worth noting that can also include things like hazing and harassment, language, grabbing, things like that repeatedly, and the significance of this happening during a time of service is layered, and we're going to look at that a bit. And one of the parts of that worth discussing, and we're going to also ask the panelists their opinions on things like this, is that when you're serving, it's very difficult to get away from a situation that's uncomfortable. Chances are someone might be stuck in that situation, especially if it's a repeated incident, right? So it's really worth just looking at both the implications of sexual trauma, because that has many, difficult layers to it as well, but also the implications of a sexual trauma that occurs within military service, because there are definitely components of that make it, additionally challenging for individuals. All right. So here's some data changes, but generally, we see that 1 in 3 women and 1 in 50 men respond yes, that they experienced MST. Now, this is when they're screened by a VA provider. So we have to keep that in mind. So those statistics are going to be higher than that. But in those screenings, 1 in 3 women and 1 in 50 men, the proportion of men serving to women is so much higher, though, that it really shows that statistically there's pretty high numbers of both genders who've experienced MST. So this bottom point here, the data speaks to the rate who have chosen to seek VA care and also have chosen to self-disclose. So the numbers are largely underreported, I'm sure, just like with many other statistics. But even with that, those are fairly high numbers to look at. So it is prevalent. And it is something that if you are working with veterans, you will come across this, unfortunately. And, education is awareness, gives you, the ability to help. So some people will say, well, I don't specialize in that. And, that's not really something that I'm gonna learn more about, but it's really unavoidable, right? So this topic, I remember very early in my career coming across veterans who were in treatment who had experienced MST, and it's unexpected sometimes when it comes up and you just want to be ready. So again, the numbers are fairly high. So just like with anything else, the type of trauma, the severity, the duration, if it is experienced among other traumatic events, if it happened once versus repeated over time, as well as the types of responses that were received by others when this person disclosed that this happened, right? So how were they supported or not supported at the time? All of these are relevant. Now, no sexual trauma will leave somebody unscathed, right? Like there's going to be a degree of damage that occurs to any individual. As you're screening and asking questions, it's good and helpful to ask other variables as well. So again, the type of trauma, the severity, the duration, if it's repeated over time or a single incident, if there were other traumatic events that occurred, and how others responded. This is very important. Hold on to that one because we're going to go into that context a bit more in just a few minutes. Okay. There were also some rates that one of the panelists shared with me about separation from service. So there are more than double veterans who have experienced MST do end up separating from service prematurely. So that adds additional wounds to that individual because they're not able to complete the service that they went in for. This is a little blurry, but I did appreciate how this was laid out. So leadership engagement is really pretty heavily looked at now, maybe wasn't always, but having leaders within a military service engage and support individuals when they come forward with something like this really does a lot to support that person in the immediate, but also long term to decrease some of the negative after effects. So a healthy environment would include dignity and respect, right? Then there's sexual harassment, obviously inappropriate advances, and sexual assault. So it occurs on a continuum. And then as we look through this continuum, we're also looking at the surrounding variables. What occurred? How was the person supported? Did they disclose? Was there a delay in their disclosure of what occurred? Did they speak to a peer first? And it's always helpful to ask, what were the details of when they disclosed that this happened? Like what surrounded that incident? Because that in itself can be re-traumatizing for individuals. So it's good to ask what that was like for that person. We talk a lot about cycles when we're looking at trauma and sexual trauma as well. Within, the military sexual trauma, there are often feelings of betrayal and shame, safety being compromised, impact on identity and esteem. Unfortunately, many feel invalidated when they do come forward. And there's this silencing effect. Now, this can occur outside of service as well. If you have experience working with sexual trauma survivors, many of them describe feeling silenced or invalidated or misunderstood. There's often some type of disruption in their structure, their service, their security as well, which does affect the individual. And then obviously these cycles do impact relationships and connections with others as well, usually in a longer term way. And I think we're going to hear about that a bit later. So I'm going to speak briefly on what happens and some of the timeline. And I know some of our panelists are much better versed in this than I am. So I do want to, in maybe 5 minutes or so, turn it over and allow them to go more into this. But this idea of re-triggering, right? So legally, when a trauma like this occurs, there's questioning that occurs, and there's things like burden of proof. And for a very long time, that person had to present this information to their commanding officer, who then determined the outcome. So the legality of it, what happens to them if they get moved, if they get, unfortunately, I know a vet who was a friend of mine, and she got what's called an R4 or an R5. I apologize if I'm getting that wrong, but she was like not allowed to join again, and she got moved, and then she ultimately got removed from service. And she carried this very deep wound because it all started with a sexual trauma. And she felt it wasn't handled well, and she wasn't supported well through that. And it was something she really carried for years to come. So the impact not only of the initial incident, but then what happened when legally the person had to file the report. Right now, if you think of a sexual trauma that occurs in the civilian world, this happens as well, to a lesser scale, right? But you do have to go, you have to file a report, you have to do the rape kit and all these things that, like, for some people, for many people, it's re-triggering and re-traumatizing, and it could occur over and over again, this retelling or reliving of what occurred to them. So just like general buzzwords to look for and listen for. Powerlessness, feeling disrespected, blamed, ignored, manipulated, controlled, frustrated, trapped. And if someone is kind of talking around some of these issues, chances are they are seeking support. And again, it's good to be ready. So I listen for language with any sort of, trauma or condition. I'm listening for language and trying not to press somebody to do more than they want to or feel ready to, but also meeting them where they're at. And if they are bringing up words like this, chances are that's kind of maybe your way of starting the conversation. Okay. So many will describe this state of proving. I'm constantly having to prove myself, right? And I pulled this quote offline when I was just looking up, like, what's the process if there's a sexual trauma that occurs in the military? You can submit these types of evidence to support your claim, right? And then it lists all of these types of records and documents. And just reading this alone, it just sounds so like insensitive, for lack of a better word. And like, I understand the need with incidents like this for there to be some level of like looking into an investigation, something like that, right? But the way that it's described, and there were recent changes to this, which I'm going to talk about as well. But like, guaranteed, if you talk to somebody who's had a trauma of this nature, the process of disclosure usually comes up. And it also reinforces that silencing effect of like, what's the point of me even trying to get help or trying to file this report? It just makes me feel worse. I don't think I'm going to get anything out of that. All right, I think there's maybe 2 more slides here. I just wanted to end on this. And again, these panelists actually taught me a lot about this in the process of preparing for this presentation today. So there were recent reforms that actually took the oversight away from the chain of command and into a third party, which was not part of the military, to kind of oversee like the legal ramifications and outcome of the report of the incident. This is tremendous because many people felt that they weren't able to like fully disclose, or they were going to be punished because, if it was handled internally, basically within the military, there were some people that would brush it under the rug or try to protect other service members and not really address it in the way that it needed to be. So this shift happened in 2021, 2022, and it basically put the the process over to a third party, which was a really strong movement for this. And I mean, keep in mind that was pretty recent. So all of the incidents preceding that were handled in a way that, were less than ideal. There were also policy changes regarding the need for evidence, the type of evidence, the way evidence was presented, making that more supportive as well. And the statute of limitation was also removed. It used to be 5 years, and now they have expanded it unanimously. So that was removed completely. Sexual harassment also became an offense in 2022. So that was elevated into something that was more serious.
Recording in progress.
Right. So some things that an individual may experience, right? So we do talk about like symptoms, criteria, things like that. Keep in mind that this list is just a snapshot. But take a moment here and just take a peek at some of these bullet points. So similar to other traumas, right? So physical health issues, relationship issues, sleep, a lot of like self-doubt, self-blame, identity, struggles with identity, mood instability, especially the year following the incident. And sometimes that leads to things like self-medication, isolation and disconnection from others, numbness, depression, general disconnect, feelings of not being safe, which could be described as anxiety for some. If there are other incidents that occur, even non sexually related. So if there's somebody who has a sexual trauma and then proceeds with their service and then experiences like combat trauma and other things like that, perhaps even losses while they're, overseas or while they're serving, as these layers add up, it can develop into pretty deeply rooted difficulties that person is navigating over time, right? So like with anything else in life, like if something goes unaddressed and then the layers add up, but during the time of somebody's service, many of these things become compressed. So there could be like I said, sexual trauma, combat trauma, and then maybe issues at home that are affecting that person, and they navigating and guiding someone through that process can be daunting as a clinician, honestly, and you don't know where to start. It's always good to ask the person where they're at and what they would like to prioritize in terms of working through these things if they are layered in that way. And it brings the stigma down, right? So we're not saying, okay, textbook says this. Instead, you're saying like, what is the most pressing thing for you to work on, and what are you most comfortable starting with? And you'll see that many things, like with other traumas, will lead into each other and overlap. So active listening, holding space, assisting in processes when appropriate, right? So if somebody is going through some type of legal process still, or has to file something like a claim with the VA, supporting them in that, allowing for open communication, understanding that there's a degree of vulnerability and respecting that. Again, these are just some samples. There's many more that we can go into. And advocacy, right? So just being aware of the policy reforms, understanding that there are many unreported cases that are unaddressed, and that unaddressed MST can lead to much more serious issues regarding quality of life. So with all that in mind, like where, this workshop today is, hugely important. And, I just want to talk about education and awareness. Yes, from what I just presented to you, great, but it's much different coming from people from the service who are going to speak to it, right? So we want to talk more about it. We want to learn. We want to learn how to screen and refer and identify the needs so we can support them best. Navigating that for an individual and for a clinician working with them, can be a process, and you really want to just be open to the stories we're going to hear today. So I just, again, huge shout out to the panelists for joining. It takes a huge degree of bravery and honesty to be on any of these panels. So I just want to segue into introducing them. Gavin, I don't know if Gavin was able to join us, but I wasn't able to include his title. So Gavin, if you're on, I apologize. But if you are on today, feel free to let us know your affiliation as well. So our panelists are these individuals, and I'm going to basically just ask a few questions and allow them to kind of discuss this topic from their point of view. All right, I can see them now. I had the screen down. Danny, you're always right at the top there. Hi. All right. So first question, like I said, it's a compelling topic. So what made you want to be part of this panel today? Why is it important to you? Can you speak to that? Raising awareness, educating on it, and maybe just personally for yourself being a part of something like this. Why is it important to you?
So I am very grateful to have crossed paths with Gavin and Alyssa and Millie, because I live in Long Island and they are all upstate, and we have created this family and this support of survivors that has helped us through many different layers of trauma, as well as finding purpose again and being able to advocate in safe spaces. I mean, Gavin has traveled all the way down 5 hours to come spend the weekend with me and just be together for Memorial Day, which is a very hard day for veterans because of the people that we've lost in service. Alyssa had a very tough time with her MST claims, and the validation of knowing that I went through the same as her was something that I think bonded us very closely together. Millie spoke about horrific experiences of the multiple times that she had been sexually assaulted, and how I also resonate with those feelings, because a lot of the times people can say, like, with combat, it's easy to say I have PTSD from combat. But as a veteran in 2023, to say I have PTSD from MST, they look at you like you have 5 heads. And it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of bravery to admit that. I felt as a veteran who had been in a Humvee rollover that fractured my back, it was for almost a decade way easier to say. And I often kind of automatically go to that and say my PTSD is from the Humvee rollover, and people are just able to digest that. And then once they get to know me a little further, and if I can establish a trust and understanding with them, is when I usually disclose, actually most of my PTSD comes from MST. And then being an advocate is one of my favorite roles. I am a creative arts therapist. I am also a mother, and I am also, a daughter, and all these other different roles. But advocating for military sexual trauma is the purpose for me that keeps me here. And having the support and the platform is really what is most important, because for 6 years when I was in school, no one wanted to pick up this idea. No one wanted to talk about it. No one wants to hear about service members harming other service members. They don't want to, discredit the service, and they just are uncomfortable. They didn't want to re-traumatize people. And I spent many years trying to find a way to have these conversations that are hard conversations in ways that aren't triggering for other survivors, but you can still get the information out there for change, and know that we see you, we hear you, we feel you, and that you're not alone. And that's like what has kept us for here, so close to each other, because we've had that shared experience that I know many veterans have had, but still struggle talking about. So we definitely spend a lot of time and effort being able to talk about it here, so that they can at least know that someone else knows what they've been through. And personally, when I came home out of service in 2015, MST wasn't something you could apply for in benefits. There was no female programs for me to utilize for the VA or for a nonprofit. I was a single mom with PTSD, MST, broken spines, postpartum, substance abuse. I mean, I had the gambit, and there was nothing for me that I could go to find the support. Luckily, I went to school on the GI Bill, and I was able to address my trauma through education and learning about it as in the field, which helped me tremendously because I was very lost. But at the same time, we need more programs. We need more people to know that this is a population that is untouched and underserved. And the more people who can learn about it, I hope can be inspired to, create that for them, because the veterans out there need it. They just don't have access to it.
So well said, Danny. Thank you. And thanks for being part of this.
Welcome.
Alyssa and Gavin, I see you did join. Hey, Gavin. Alyssa, Gavin, and Millie, can you speak a little bit as to why this is important to you?
I could,
Sure. Gavin, do you want to go?
Oh, you could go ahead.
So I am an Army vet. I served 8 years in the Army as a military police officer. I'm also a West Point graduate. And my sexual assault occurred while I was a West Point cadet. So I had a really hard time reconciling going to school with the best of the best and being in a position where that best of the best had taken something from me that I could never get back. I struggled for years with my assault and processing and dealing with it. I went through numerous abusive relationships, kind of just feeling like I belonged there. That was what I deserved. And then I went through my claim process in 2021, and it was an 11.5-month process. And that 11.5-month process kind of opened my eyes to how many other people were out there going through this in silence and going through this alone. How many other people were out there who needed support and needed just a friendly face who understood what they were going through. And so now I help a lot of local veterans with their claims. I help them by reading their statements and listening to their stories and explaining how the process works and just being that veteran who is there, who is in their corner. So for me, I feel like this is important because it affects so many people and it affects us so deeply. And a lot of us aren't getting help. So I think it's great to have all these clinicians here who can learn about what we've been through and what we found helpful. Thank you.
I'll go.
Thanks, Gavin.
First I have to say, always get anxious talking about this, all this, because for me, I'm not someone that experienced MST in service. I'm a childhood sexual assault survivor that joined the military. And when I was in service, I was medically discharged based on some botch medical procedures that the doctors end up doing when I was in service. So when it felt like when I left my house to escape all of that and then go back into and then go in the military and then feel like I was kicked out the military to go back to someplace I didn't want to be, those are conversations that you really don't know how to have with people. And for me, up to this day of living 40 years on Earth, I still haven't had time to really process and say I'm okay today. And I know a lot of people know that because I get emotional a lot. My wife, when she sees me, she sometimes tries to connect and I get disconnected. It took me a while to just go to therapy. As a Black man that came from Jamaica, lived in a Jamaican household, therapy was not one of those conversations that we've had growing up. So when I finally went into spoke to someone just to say, hey, I don't know what's going on. I'm feeling depressed. I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling tired. I'm about to lose my job. I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm going to be in my marriage for too long. All they could say is, well, okay. It was the worst experience for me going into speaking to somebody and not feeling validated about why I was there. And then when I spoke to someone else, felt like the same thing. Then when I spoke to someone else again, it felt like the same thing. It it felt like I was trying my best to not commit suicide, to talk to somebody that will listen to me to convince me that you should matter today. And and that's why it's important for I think for these conversations because I know for a lot of folks, just to have a conversation about how their day was could be it could be the hardest thing for anybody just to say, I'm feeling depressed today. And then when you tell somebody you're feeling depressed, what did they tell you? Sometimes they'll have the right words to say, what you want to hear, or you just try to find excuses to talk to somebody that that's not going to say anything because you don't want to hear anything. And that's where a lot of us, we really sometimes dig ourselves in a rabbit hole where we don't want to get out, and we just keep digging ourselves deeper and deeper and deeper. And then that's where depression, anxiety, like I tell folks up to this day, I am suicidal. I have suicidal ideations. Every day I go home, I smile at my kids, I smile at my wife, but I know, there's going to be that one triggering event that could, lead me down thinking, wow, today's not worth it. And I know today I am worth it. Today it does matter because I have, some great folks around me that will absolutely say, Gavin, what's going on? They'll text me, they'll do everything to reassure me that every day matters. And that's why these conversations are important, because for those individuals that don't know how to have those conversations with someone like me that is rebellious with trying to figure out things and will absolutely doubt every clinician that I talk to because I'll think that they have another agenda. It's good to hear the perspective why that person will have those self-defeating thoughts or those perceptions that, as a clinician, you're not doing a good job. Or as a clinician, you don't know to say the right thing to me. And, hearing our voices today will, give you another perspective of why someone will think something. Thank you.
Thanks, Gavin. Millie.
Hi, everyone. Like Gavin, this stuff usually makes me quite nervous. It shouldn't, but I guess it does. I believe in educating and awareness because obviously I'm one of the older veterans on this panel, and I want to make people aware that it doesn't just go away. It's a long-term trauma. It really is. And it rears its ugly head in many stages of your life. For me, I'm a Marine Corps vet. So just being a Marine alone was, grin and bear it. You need to take it. You need to be a Marine. You need to be strong. And when it happened to me, betrayal was the biggest part of it. For me, it was the betrayal. I am also a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, and I went into the military to escape any new developments in that abuse. I was just trying to get away from family members and other people that were readily available to take advantage of a young woman. And I also thought the Marine Corps would make me tough. you know, and it did physically, it did, I could run the 15 miles. I could, do 80 sit-ups in a minute. I did it. I did it all, and I did it well. But for me, my military sexual trauma actually started with my recruiter. He harassed me and harassed me and harassed me. And at the time, I was dating another Marine who happened to be someone I grew up with. And I remember him saying to me, stay away from the recruiter. But you can't really stay away from your recruiter because they're preparing you to go into the service. And they all have these little um, physical fitness tests and all these times and all these outings. And he harassed me, harassed me, harassed me. And finally, I guess you can't really call it rape, but it was definitely sexual harassment. He insisted that he needed to prepare me for going into the service as a virgin. So for me, that was, I gave in. And it was traumatic, but I just said, you know what? I'm a Marine. I can take it all. I can take it. This just needs to prepare me for all the wars. And it also will help me protect others, which was my priority, was protecting others. Like Danny said, for me, I suffered um, a few episodes of rape and many, many episodes of sexual um, abuse and harassment. I actually served in the 80s, and there was an atmosphere of, just hang out, party, um, serve your country, but make sure you get everything out of it you can, you know? And, so why do I feel people need to know? Um, for me, my family suffered and suffers today. My marriage suffered. I became an alcoholic right when I was in the military after my episodes. And then I left the Marine Corps an alcoholic. Um, I became, extremely promiscuous because if I was being raped and used that way, well, then I felt useless in any other way, you know? So, so anyway, the process happened, and and I went for help when I had my daughter because things got really, really bad. And then I uh, I went for help, and I thought I was healed. And then about 10 years ago, I developed a breathing issue. Um, I developed a lifetime disorder, and my lungs wouldn't work, and I couldn't breathe. And I started getting nightmares, terrible, terrible nightmares of my assailants. In one incident, when I was raped, I was choked and lost consciousness. So in my nightmares, I saw my assailants, which were more than one, choking me, holding me down, and actually rendering me not able to breathe. So that didn't help my treatment for my breathing issue. I couldn't even use a CPAP machine without having a full out attack, panic attack. And between that and the nightmares, it was just incredible. So I sought out help, and actually, the breathing issue happened right before I started working for Vet to Vet. And I was I primarily I work with all veterans, but I do work a lot with women veterans. And one woman veteran I work with, she says, "Are you okay?" Because I was like, we were somewhere and we were drinking beer, and I just started to tremble. And she's like, "What's wrong with you? You okay?" And it was a trigger. There was a guy that was like really sloppy drunk, and his pores just smelled, that smell of that manly smell of beer coming out of your pores. And it was a bad trigger. She also is a veteran, and she also suffered, is a survivor of military sexual trauma. And she says, it's time, you need to get help. Something is going on. And I said, no, I'm an old woman now. If I haven't gotten treated until now, I'm not going to do it. Um, she convinced me. She finally convinced me. My marriage was breaking up, and she finally convinced me. And I said, okay. And I not only did it for myself, but I wasn't the only woman or even veteran suffering from the effects and trauma of military sexual trauma. I actually had 2 clients who were males who were kicked out of the military, and it turned out that they also suffered from military sexual trauma. So much so that during one of our support groups, one of them asked to stay behind. And he says, I can't tell my mom what happened to me in the military, but you're a woman and you're of my mom's age. Can you just hold me and let me cry? And that's what he did. I held him and he cried as if he was crying on his mother's shoulders. But he couldn't break his mother's heart this way. So he didn't want to tell her, he didn't want to open up to her. So why I do this? Because not only does it help Millie, which has got to be my priority right now, it also helps those I work with every day.
Thank you all for those answers. Really helpful for people to understand not only why the openness of these conversations is so important, but how these conversations evolve over time and how the effects of sexual trauma evolves over time. So really appreciate you all for highlighting those points. Something that a couple of you kind of referenced was the process, whether it was filing a claim, coming forward, disclosing, or just looking for support and therapy. Can you speak to, you can speak to how that process was for you, but really like how you would want that process to be, or what was helpful for you, what wasn't helpful for you, how it affected you. And then also like in the back of your head, like what everyone on today, what you want them to know, in terms of supporting somebody through those types of processes.
It's funny you say that, because as a clinician myself, my best friend is a clinician. She's a Marine, and she's always yelling at me like, Danny, you can't discredit therapy. You're a therapist. But my experience, like Gavin's, and possibly for Alyssa and Millie too, is that the people I have seen, whether it be from the VA or private counselors, didn't know how to recognize who I was and my needs. And so it felt very like playing chess for someone who is a clinician. It's like, I need a therapist of the therapist, honey. Like, I need someone who can be direct, but also understands trauma-informed care. And me personally, I've had absolute horrific care at the VA. And when Millie said about the sleep apnea, I also suffer from sleep apnea. And when they were fitting me for the mask, and I told them, like, listen, like, I've been strangled. I can't wear this at night. It's just, I'm not going to sleep. They were like, where's your military bearing? And I was just like, it doesn't exist when you're, a survivor of trauma. And the therapists I've seen, they have harped on more of like a kind of like a pity in a way of like keeping you fragile, like or like like they don't want to touch it because they don't want you to break, or a hot potato where they're like, oh, there's your trauma. I don't know what to do with this. So you have to be very confident if you are a clinician to work with someone with military social trauma, because like Millie and like Alyssa, we were females in a male-dominated world. We're not fragile. We are fragile like a bomb, not like a flower. We are people who do not want to be seen as victims any longer. I mean, Gavin being a Black male doesn't want to be seen as someone weak or a victim either. And if you treat someone like very fragile, it can be very damaging in the sense that I felt that there was no trust there, that I couldn't handle a session and that you couldn't handle if I broke down. And I want to trust that if I break down, you can hold the space for me. And that's super important, as well as being well versed in the different populations of veterans. You know, I was a military police officer like Alyssa. Our experiences in our branch is going to be different to Gavin's, who is Air Force, and Millie's, who is Marine. They're just the demands, the ideologies, the way that we were trained is completely different. So you have to be versatile. You have to know the differences, our time differences. In 1994, Don't Ask, Don't Tell was, you know, created, and in 2011 it was disbanded. So people who were even thought of as maybe homosexual could be discharged dishonorably from the military. Is a huge way of opening up the floodgates of being hypervigilant, being suspicious, you know, always worrying what people think about you. Because if you were gay in the military from anywhere and during those times up into 2011, which was not that long ago, you could have been kicked out and you could have been top soldier, top officer. You could have won medals galore and it didn't matter. And people have to understand, like, these are the things we carry, is like hiding these parts of us is really hard to come out. So you have to be strong enough that if we give them to you, you could hold them. And for me, you know, I was a female in a combat, you know, MOS. I had to hold my bearing 24/7. I wasn't allowed to break down. So if I want to break down, this is the deepest this is going to get. You know, you have to be able to help me, and you have to know your resources. And I don't want a phone number to call. I don't want that. I want you to be able to direct me in a way where I can bring myself out of it, because I'm not always going to have you in session. As someone who is the client, I'm not always going to have my therapist. So like, I need ways to have those coping skills. Teach me how to help myself. Don't just, you know, say you're sorry. Don't just, you know, validation is very important, but we also need some kind of skills to be learned in session, right? And that's something that I think is very important. It's not just about being able to explain what happened to us, but also how to help those things, you know, breaking the barriers of staying a victim. You are a victim or you're a survivor, and there's a point in your life where you will change. I was a victim for almost a decade till I decided I'm tired of being a victim to this experience, and I'm going to start fighting back. And that was when I became a survivor, and that's when I started advocating, because I wasn't scared anymore. Who knew? I wasn't scared anymore on if you're gonna do an investigation. You want to do an investigation, you're gonna pull down an entire battalion of the MP Corps, honey. So have fun with that. I will be waiting, and I will give you every statement, because I live in my truth. I know what happened. Everybody else lied. And military police officers, and this, what I'm talking about with like the specialty of the MOSs, Alyssa knows that if you're an MP and you said that you had a sexual assault, you're now disclosing to someone who you work with. And what is the barriers in that? And the fact that these are your leadership, and the people who were when I was in my experience, they were my 2 squad leaders and a specialist. And so they were in my platoon. And so it's like, those are the people you go to for your food, your shelter. We lived in the same building for 11 months. I had to walk through the same doors I was raped in for 11 months overseas in Korea. And I couldn't call home because Skype was barely a thing then. You know, it was a 12-hour difference. So my family was sleeping when I was up. There's barriers to us even being able to tell our story at the time, and we hold on to it as, all right, maybe one day. And I'm so happy to hear, Millie, that someone had someone to play that role with you and get that relief, because for me, I'm 32 years old and my family still doesn't know. I'm on every webinar for MST, and they still to this day don't know. So I can definitely resonate with people not wanting to know who's strong has been weak, as well as the male and female difference of, I've had males who are in the Navy say to me, because I have the perspective that I don't believe females should be in the military integrated with males. I think they should be separated. And he said, if it wasn't for females being integrated into the military, MST would be wildly underreported because men aren't going to speak up. And a woman's going to say, hell no, this isn't happening. And if it wasn't for the women who advocated for themselves, then men couldn't. And we know that those numbers are skewed and that the men aren't as reporting as much as women are. And he was grateful for that. And I hold on to that as like something to, for me as a positive for my experience to say, okay, well, if that's, you know, if that's something good, then I'll keep it. But we all know that that's, you know, that MST is going to continue unless people speak about it.
I could say trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma, you know, really can break somebody. Because when I was actually, yeah, when I was in service, right when I was trying to figure out if I was going to be staying in or not, I was like, where's my mom? Where's my dad? Like, where's my family? Because I'm in San Antonio, everybody's in New York. I'm like, hey, I'm going through the worst situation right now where they diagnosed with seizures, with severe headaches, had back pain. And I'm like, where's my family? So when I finally got discharged and I was back in New York, I didn't find out until I think a couple years later that my mom said, you know, the sergeant called me and said that, you know, you're a man, you shouldn't, as you know, no one should be there with you. You should be able to take care of yourself. And I'm like, are you? I didn't say this because I was like, okay, I'm gonna respect my mom, but in my head, I'm like, are you serious? Like, I, I actually called my cousin when I was in service going through all this, and I'm like, I told her, listen, I can't deal with this. I can't deal with what I've been dealing with and knowing that I'm gonna have to deal with medical conditions where I can't even live a life that I want to live. And I told her like that day I was gonna kill myself. And she said, Gavin, you're selfish. And I'm like, what? What do you mean I'm selfish? There's nobody here with me except for some folks down the hall and, you know, the sergeants and everything. And I'm like, and we were in a back and forth with it, where she just called me selfish and everything I kept saying. I'm like, all right, whatever. So then when I, you know, come back to New York and, you know, years later, and I finally spoke to someone about, you know, everything that has happened to me from my own medical health to where, you know, the stuff that I haven't dealt with when I was, you know, just a young child and going into service. I was like, okay, finally, I could talk to somebody. They'll listen to me, and that's what my perspective was. That when I talk to them, that there's going to be a solution at the end of everything. And the first person I actually talked to was at the VA, and unfortunately, it didn't go as well as I thought. It was 6 sessions, and after the 6th session, I didn't know it was going to be 6 sessions. They said, well, you know, I didn't. They told me that they didn't think that I was going to need more sessions, and I'm like, okay, so your perception of me was already concluded long before we even got to the 6th session. All right, so saw somebody else, and that's why I said I kept seeing other people and different individuals, because it seemed like as much as I'm like, okay, I don't want to. I don't want to kill myself. I want to. I want to be able to be present. I want to be able to do this. I want to do that. As much as I kept telling myself all these things, I was like just looking for someone, just not in my family circle, but outside of that, because I'm like, they don't know what they're talking about. My mom, like, oh, all those people don't know what they're talking about. They don't care. They're just there because they're just there. But I was looking for someone just to say, hey, you know, I understand the military was wrong with what they did, with how you were medically discharged, you know, what this happened to you as a child. Like, I was looking for somebody as a clinician just to sit down and say, hey, everything is going to be okay. And we just have a normal conversation. But it for me, it wasn't like that. It felt like I was talking to a wall sometime, to individuals, and then hearing things that I studied in school. I'm like, yeah, I could have given myself that. I could have recorded it and then responded to the recording of what I did. And that's, you know, and that's where, for me, therapy has been the hardest thing since I went into therapy the first time, I think in 2013. You know, every year has been, it's been growth, but it hasn't been accelerated growth. I know I'm not gonna be out of therapy the next 10, because my goal was like, okay, I got to get through therapy the next 3 years or 5 years. I put a deadline on how much, where my mind was going to be. And reality is, it's not like that. And I think for a lot of folks, when they speak to someone, they go in thinking that they're going to get healed right away. And also when you go through the process of remembering and thinking about the past and just the different things. Because for me, I was, sexually assaulted as a child, and I was groomed, growing up. So when I finally became, I'll say, 18-year-old man that's going into the military that says that they're going to serve their country, I was still an innocent boy trying to figure out, was this the right decision? And then when I was in service, I was like, okay, everything that happened to me in the past, I'm going to start anew. Nobody's going to know anything because, I'm going to do this the right way. And then when I was, when everything happened with my own health, it became something where I was like, huh, that you can't run away from your past. You can't run away from the things that's happened to you. And I think, for a lot of us, and I guess the most difficult thing for me is, honestly, as a Black man, I I keep saying that I should be seen one way and not seen as a weak person. I have 3 children, and I keep telling myself that they will never see me weak. They'll never see me crying. They'll never see me suffering. They'll never see me in the hospital. I keep saying never, never, never all the time when I look at them. And and I tell my wife, listen, if I'm going through a situation, just get them out the room. I don't want them to see me at my weakest moment. And that's what I'm scared of, honestly. I don't want them to see their father, this this tall, strong man that is trying to lead them, you know, being vulnerable. And for me as a guy, my perception is that I should always be able to be the strong head in the house. So I should always be able to talk to my wife and say, hey, listen, this is the best thing for us as a family. Hey, if I'm going to work, I want to be able to provide for all of them, and those are the things that for myself, it's empowering. But then when those thoughts come up, where I'm at night, 2 o'clock in the morning, I sleep with my door locked sometimes. I sleep with the light out in the hallway because I want to make sure that I don't see any footsteps under my door. I sleep with my body facing the door because I'm going to make sure that if anybody's going to come through that door, I'm going to be ready. I sleep prepared for every single thing. I have cameras and at my looking all 4 corners of the house. I have lights, that motion sensors, that when it goes on, I look straight at that door and wait for somebody to turn that knob. That's how I live my life. And as paranoid and as crazy it is, right now it's the most comfortable thing for me because I'm like, I'm safe. And for me to say I'm safe doing that, you can't really tell people that's how you live your life because you're going to feel like somebody's going to call you crazy. Somebody's going to think you're insane. Somebody's going to think so many different things. And I think for a lot of people, it's like when they go through those process and situations, they don't know who to talk to that will understand that, you know, putting up a camera at your house because you're trying to see if anybody's coming in is okay at times, or having your nightlight on in the house or sleep with. And thank you, Danny, for the stars because we have the stars in the kids' room, and that's where Danny showed me some nightlight stars that actually reflect on the ceiling, and I love that. It doesn't put the kids to sleep, but it makes me feel okay. And I always tell the kids, yeah, this is the stars. Listen to the ocean. Listen to all this stuff. And and I love that because the kids actually love looking at the lights, but for me, it also makes me feel good too. So, I found a way to feel better during the day, but at nighttime, that's when the worst really comes out for a lot of us because we can't speak to our clinicians. We can't speak to sometime our friends because they might be going through a situation, or they might be sleeping, or you put so much perception of like why someone will not answer the phone at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and then you sit there by yourself thinking, is the next few hours even worth it? And that's where, when you're able to speak to somebody, a clinician, if you're able to share, if that person is able to share those different things, that's progress. I still haven't told my clinicians all these different things because I feel like I'm going to be judged. There's going to be note in my chart saying Gavin is suicidal. He's a suicidal risk and all these different things. And I'm like, nope, 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 that's not me. I'm not going to be institutionalized. I'm not going to be in some locked facility. I'm going to be outside with my family. And I think for a lot of us, it's the fear of what might happen if we start talking about the things that really affect us. Like if we're like, okay, I'm feeling down right now, and I'm calling 988 for help. Are they going to call the cops on me because I'm this way? And our minds are our worst enemies sometimes when we're by ourselves. And I'll say someone that would be a person that is empathetic, someone that listens, and which is, for us clinicians, that's a common, that should be common, but we know for a lot of individuals that are clinicians that you still got to beat that in their head sometime because they still won't be empathetic to the people that they listen to. They still won't be sympathetic to what they're saying because they just, I can't explain why, but sometimes it's just difficult for a lot of us to feel like our message is getting through to the next person to have a response that will be like, yeah, I could live with that. I could understand. I'll see you next week because I know you're doing great things for me.
I resonate with the adapting the survival techniques, Gavin, and it's just like what makes us feel comfortable. Like we have to adapt in our own ways, and some things are maladaptive to some people because it seems like you're being too suspicious or you're being too careful. But for us, like that's what calms us. Like that's not crazy, and especially like the not being labeled as crazy or being sent to, we call it Unit 22 here in Northport, VA. Like, I ain't trying to go to Unit 22, like, because I can't be taken out of the fight. I'm a single mom. I'm a household. I am a homeowner. I am a clinician who has a caseload of 40 people. Like, I can't be sent away for 5 days because I have a suicidal thought. I've had suicidal thoughts since I was 10 years old. And it doesn't mean I'm going to take action on it, but it does, I do want to be able to be safe enough in a space where I can talk about like, hey, this is what's happening for me. And I know Gavin feels the same way. He's head of household, like he knows he can get through it, but if you don't want to feel like you can't, if you're with someone and you feel you can't talk about it, like that's a disservice in therapy if you can't feel like you could talk about it.
Before moving on to the next question, Alyssa, Millie, is there anything you want to add to this?
No, thanks.
They covered a lot. So I think I'm going to ask one, maybe two more questions and then open it up to see if the attendees have questions for us. But one thing that I found important as a clinician that I'd love to ask you all today is the distinction of it being a military sexual trauma, right? So versus a civilian sexual trauma, right? Because there's a lot of overlap. And then there's a lot that is not overlapping. So how could that be treated differently? What should people be aware of that's unique to sexual trauma occurring within military service? And if someone could touch on, because I feel like I did a poor job of it, even some of the policy changes like of recent that would have implications for an individual.
Well, I'll talk a little bit about the difference between the military and civilian life. We go into the military to be part of a team, part of a troop. We have people that we may not even like and that we go into trenches with, and we rely on each other to survive. The betrayal part of it is that those same people that you're in the trench with trying to complete a mission are the people that hurt you. That is overwhelming to say the least. But at the end of the day, the situation, the episode happens, you have to go back there and you still have to complete that mission. And so there's a certain amount of pushing it aside or really treating yourself, treating your emotional wound, even if it's only temporary, so that you can get through that mission. So I think that's very strong in the military. I mean, myself, is I know when I did tell my CEO what happened, um, I was actually stationed in the state of Virginia, and at that time, it's close to 40 years ago, they had laws on the books that were so ridiculous when it came to women, and they threatened to put me in the brig because they said, well, if we make it official that you were raped, you will be the one going to jail because you had extramarital sex. I mean, how do you deal with that with the same people you have to complete this job with? So it's something so simple like, so is it different? Yeah, because you're being demanded to keep your body and your mind in the best shape as possible so that you could be ready for anything. And so that you could be ready to not only protect yourself, but protect those that are surrounding you, even the perpetrator.
People don't realize that the Uniform Code of Military Justice was formed in the early 1950s based off of the Bible. So extramarital sex, even as someone who was raped, it's something to us as who you live in America and you're a civilian, you think of, well, they were a victim. No. Millie is now considered a subject. And if that person is married, they're both going to be persecuted, but whoever has the highest rank will probably most likely get away with it, right? They're going to use that leverage, or they're going to say, well, they've been in so many years, they have so many, let's look at all the good things they did. Millie, I would believe, as you were lower enlisted when it happened, right? And so she's not going to have that time to prove that she was that, top-notch Marine, or even in the sense of, she's still a victim no matter what. But it's the way that the UCMJ was used. Now they're changing it to say, that the justice system is different. We have to abide by laws that do not equal to the ones here. You can't sue someone who's in the military. They don't get put on the registry for a sexual assault. So they get out of the military, they're coming home to their families and states that they're walking around as a sexual offender, and nobody knows that. It's a different, the punishments are extra duty. So you're working around the clock rather than being in jail. The punishments are losing rank, which they will regain anyway. The punishment is to be put into a different unit, so then they could just do it again. The justice in being a military sexual assault survivor does not exist because of the UCMJ. And Alyssa and I, as military police officers, it's moral injury, because now I'm going to a call of someone who was sexually assaulted and I can't even write the report. Or if I do write the report, you have a choice between the commander to handle it or us to handle it. And 9 times out of 10, the commander's going to handle it. You're going to give them extra duty, and that's over. That's the justice. And I want to go into some statistics that were from 2022 in the Department of Defense, that of the unrestricted reports, which is a whole other subject of restricted reports versus unrestricted. But for rape, the total of unrestricted reports was 481. Sexual assault was 1745. 1,745 people were just assaulted, whether or not they were touched or just made uncomfortable, and they don't trust the person next to them, can be just as damaging to unit morale or to their service as being raped. And for me, I was raped by multiple people, just like Millie. So there is something that people will say in my experience to me is like, well, it wasn't so bad if they were touched. It wasn't so bad if they were sexually, harassed. It is bad, because I know that even though I was sexually assaulted by multiple people, I also know that later on in my military career, every one of my leadership had a key to my door. So if I came home from a late night, or if I came home early, someone could be sitting on my bed, and which they did, waiting for me. And if you don't think that that harassment doesn't mess with someone, it does. And that is seen as sexual because this is my private place, right? That's if I'm coming home, I'm undressing, I'm in a shower, and there's your team leader waiting for you, that's a problem. And people don't understand that, like, that's what's happening. And those little things are huge to someone who's young or in a different country or a different state and away from people who they can trust to keep them safe. And safety becomes something on the forefront of their mind 24/7 after that. And that's why you have veterans who are sleeping with knives and weapons and things, because they were not safe in a place where they were trained to be the definition of safety, right? I know how to where I need to point a weapon to keep other people safe. I know how to take apart a weapon if it malfunctions. I know how to keep control and coordinate if there's a crime scene and make sure people don't come in. I know how to keep everyone else safe, but I'm not safe. And that's what is really the point that continues on in your relationships. For the grade and status, the ranks that you see, 3,333 E1 and E4, those are privates through specialists. 67% were sexually assaulted. And then you have, this is of the different races. White is 69%, Black 17%, American Indians 1%, and Pacific is 6%. There's statistics out there, but there's so much more that we don't know about. They have accounted for victims being 4,952 in the year 2022, right? But they also have the same subjects being 4,447, because we're in the military together. We are both the same. And it's not that it's like, oh, she or he was a service member and this is a civilian and they're on two different playing fields. They're not. We're together, we're integrated. And that equals for 100%. And people need to understand that using someone's rank above them, the fear of reprisal is enormous. I don't want to tell that I was sexually assaulted because I don't want to put an investigation. I don't want my unit to be on hold. I can't be taken out of the game. I can't be taken off the road. I can't go to mental health because I'm a police officer and I can't have my weapon taken away from me. These are barriers to my service. If I was able to get help earlier, I might have been better. But when I got out, I fell so deep in a hole because I wasn't given the tools then. I only was able to find them later. And thankfully for me, I was an artist who then fell back upon art and art therapy, which was an anonymity for me in the first couple of years of getting out, to be able to talk about my trauma and produce art and of my emotions and things that I can't even talk about or describe in a way that people can understand. But if they look at an image, they feel it. And that for me was enough. But there's a lot of different levels of the sexual assault versus rape versus harassment that I think has a stigma in itself too, that we have to remember.
Really well said, Danny. Thank you so much. Any other comments on this? Kind of distinguishing and just the reference points for military sexual trauma specifically?
I think there's there's a power structure that exists in the military that you don't see as often in civilian situations. I was raped when I was a plebe, which is a freshman. I was 2 months into my freshman year at West Point. So I had been in the military all of 2 months. And then an upperclassman came into my room while I was sleeping and covered my mouth and raped me. And I spent the next year and a half seeing him in the hallways. There was nothing to be done because at that point you didn't report if you wanted to stay. And that was a decision that I had to make. was I going to report this assault or was I going to graduate West Point, which was a really shitty decision. Sorry for, you know, an 18-year-old kid to be making. And I think the culture that has surrounded it has always been very keep it quiet, we'll deal with it internally, we'll brush it under the rug, we'll all move on, we'll all be fine. And the victims end up not getting the care that they need, not getting the support that they need, because we are so busy keeping our mouths shut and keeping our heads forward and continuing on with the mission that we don't deal with the trauma. I didn't deal with my trauma till 20 years after it happened. And by then I had been through a failed marriage, a failed 8-year relationship with my kid's dad. I am now a year and 7 months sober, which is awesome. But there's a power structure that exists in the military and this culture of silence that exists that both result in the victim or the survivor not getting the care that they need.
Thank you, Alyssa. Millie, do you have something?
I just want to say that I see in the chat there's a lot of people who have suffered from sexual trauma and rape, and it's something that's why we need to be aware. That's why we need to educate. The the importance of not only having a therapist who is there and understands one way or another, maybe not empathize but understands, but also to have peer mentors. I mean, that's important in the veteran community. But when you're a civilian, you know, we touch other people's lives and we can help other people understand that first you believe, and you're there for the person, especially when they are currently the victim, you know, they haven't moved on to the survival mode. But not everyone is equipped to help someone who has suffered such a severe trauma. In that case, it's okay to say, I don't know what to do, I don't know what to say, and maybe, you know, tell the person about, you know, going to someone else, or just be there, let them release what they're feeling after that trauma, you know, because like I say, not everyone is a clinician, and we love our clinicians, we love that they are there and available, but you know what, sometimes we have to make that movement, like the Me Too movement said. You know, we had a movement that said first believe. We need to first believe. That's something that's been in a lot of training with police officers and school guidance, school counselors and like that. First believe, and then help the person. But if you don't know, you don't know. And unfortunately, sometimes we do more harm than good. But that's why we need to just be there and support and listen, and just then maybe find out how we can help that person move forward.
It's a really good point, Millie. Thank you. So a quick question before we open it up to the attendees. Millie brought up the importance of peer services, and it may be a matter even of making a referral to a peer in conjunction with therapy, right? Like some of these things can be done, you know, collaboratively. And Danny brought up art therapy. Are there any other like services or recommendations that you would have, maybe that have worked for you or that you've seen work for others, just in terms of navigating some of this, you know, this deeper stuff and the stuff that really, like Danny said, it's hard to put words to. But Millie, I think it's a great point about peers, because peers, you know, it could be a different angle that really gets somebody what they need in these instances. So are there any other recommendations or services that you would highlight for this?
Yeah, I would highlight vet to vet in general for any veteran, but if you are an MST survivor, we are peer specialists. We're here. We want to help. We want to help you walk through the process. We don't want you to have to do it alone. I know here at least we offer art therapy, music therapy, equine therapy. I know for me, I've gone through cognitive processing therapy with my therapist, which I found really helpful, if not very overwhelming. And I've done Reiki, aromatherapy, hypnotherapy. I've willing to try anything really. And then I have this great journal that we found. It's just like a bullet journal, but it's all veteran focused. It was written by a Navy veteran, so all the questions are very veteran centric as you go through the journal. And it's just stuff to reflect. Anything that helps you reflect and process and move forward is super helpful.
Journaling is huge. Just getting the thoughts out to then later digest. I have like a tons of books of just, your written experience. I think a history too, seeing seeing other veterans or hearing or listening or experiencing their time in service in a different generations of veteran, I think is important too, like how women were treated in the 80s versus the 90s versus the 2000s. Or men, anyone really, and who has, I think if we talk about our own experience, the more connectivity we have to others, right? And part of that is your memory, and your memory you lose with time. So journaling will help you. And also it's a reality check too, because there's times where I think like, did that happen? Like, how did that happen? And then, I'm lucky enough to have friends who will say, yes, that did happen. You're not crazy, or, that, and you lose friends over time too. And so you don't always have that. So I am a huge person with like historians. Like I really think journaling helps. And it's cathartic, getting it out. Your thoughts, that are scrambled in your head get down on paper, and sometimes it's just a little bit lighter to carry on with. Art therapy, just art making in itself has been great for me. My recent journey has been equine. I am involved heavily in Warrior Ranch here on Long Island, and I started with the grooming of the horses and the groundwork. And recently I have started roping. And if you don't know what roping is, that is when you get on a horse and you rope a calf. And it's a team building exercise. So for me, being a female in a male platoon in a combat MLS for 4 years was very much hazing, punishment, and it was not easy. They didn't want me to be there, and I had to prove I'm worthy of sitting at this table, and I had to be perfect with my hair in a soft bun 24/7 without a single strand out at that. And so being a decade out and working with these males, having the males in the arena is hard, because I'm super worried about being kicked in the face by a horse. I am worried about looking stupid. I am worried about, the little, tips that we have with the different branches. And I'm worried about getting hurt. And because I have a broken back, I've taken a lot of time before getting onto the horse. So I'm really just working on the ground part of roping. But at the same time, as much as I'm learning a new skill, I'm learning a skill that is a sober network at the same time, right? It's something I can do. I just need a rope, and we've even done it with a friend of mine and a fire hydrant. And do what you do, adapt and overcome. And you're able to meet people, right? And being around men and learning a skill for me is this thing that I had to do when I was in the military. And even though I was being punished every time I was wrong, I now have a chance to restart the story, right? I'm able to be around men, learn a new skill and not be punished. Be around men, learn a new skill and be safe. And that is something that, even though it's horses and it's ropes and you're like, that has nothing to do with therapy, it's therapeutic for me, because I'm pushing my boundaries, that I am scared and I have to do something. And I have to trust the people next to me. I have to trust the horses. I have to trust myself. I can't be nervous. I can't be thinking of other things. And there's times when things will be said or things will be done, and the instructor who thankfully is very, very patient. Even if he was airborne, he's very technical, you know, that he'll say, you know, he'll be like, get out of your head, Danny, get out of your head. Like, stop thinking, you know, get in the moment, just throw, because he'll see me kind of just like drifting off in my own head. And I need that. I need someone to kind of break that thought process and say, you're doing this now. You're not thinking about the past. You're not worried about that. You're here and now in the moment. And something that being present is something that we talk a lot about in therapy, being present in the moment. A lot of things in substance abuse, a lot of recovery is being present, and something that's really hard for me because my head is so loud. And it's a new skill that I have learned. I'm learning the basics of how to stand, how to hold, and all that stuff is something that has really helped me that I would have never thought I'd try doing, but very much enjoy.
I'm actually I have mobility issues, and so I tried music therapy a few months ago, and that really helped me a lot. I'm still using it, but it's not musical therapy. Like, I don't play an instrument. I do sing, but I don't play an instrument or anything, but it's listening music therapy, where you listen and you evaluate your feelings, and you can intermingle that with other meditation techniques. And it doesn't have to be the classical music or the sounds of, you could be listening to Super Freak and still get some therapy from that, or children's movies have the best therapeutic music to listen to, like, I love Broken and Beautiful from the little stuffed animal movie. And it just reminds you of how amazing you are. And sometimes that's all we need, is to remind ourselves how amazing we are in the day to day.
I have to say, gardening, anything outdoorsy. I think I find a lot of my calmness when I am outside on my knees, digging up the dirt, digging out the rocks, all that good stuff, to just plant a flower or plant a tree. And last year it was the heat wave, and I actually had my son, who didn't like touching dirt, and my daughter out with me. And eventually, by the time we finished everything, we had planted some rows around the house, and they love it. My son goes out every time when it's blooming and smells it. And I'm like, wow, this is amazing. That for me is therapy, because it feels like I feel empowered when I do that, because it feels like I could get down, I could do something, I could bring something to alive, and then allow it to the beauty just to bring, provide a landscape around our home. And for me, that is, really amazing. Also, woodworking, which I've actually gotten into, involved these past couple of years. If you throw some wood at me, I will love to build something out of it. I love Legos. So if you have a bunch of Legos, 2,000, 3,000 pieces, I will be so dedicated with doing that. So creativity is something that I like to bring to my mental health. And I think a lot of individuals like to do that as well.
I like that you all brought up not just the services, but like the benefits, the metaphors, growth and peace and processing and communication and being present. Like these are the things that offset, the invalidation and the fear and the anxiety and some of the other components that you address, betrayal, all of that. You've found these outlets, not just for, a linear therapy purpose, like they're multifaceted. So I love how you described each of them without even prompting. You guys are so good. Thank you. With that in mind, I do want to open it up. Feel free to use the chat box, or if you want to unmute yourself, but I will ask that people are just very respectful with this panel and the questions that they ask. We probably have time for maybe 2 or 3 questions. If anyone has something they'd like to address the panel with. We'll give everyone a second to see if anything comes in. You guys got a lot of really good feedback though today so far. Have any of you worked with non-military counselors? Pros and cons.
My therapist is a VA therapist, but she is a civilian. And she has some specializing in military sexual trauma, which I think makes her really well qualified. I think the con comes down to having to explain like your acronyms and your terms, and thankfully Maya's been working in the VA space so long, she knows most of the acronyms I spit out at her, so I don't have to like derail and explain what I'm talking about. I like that she is not military. I like the perspective that she brings. I like that she is outside that system to me. I never saw a therapist in the military. I was an officer and it was very frowned upon at the time. I'm hoping that is changing somewhat, but yeah, that's my thoughts on that one.
I actually see a therapist who's an Army veteran, and I've connected with him, I think, more than anybody else that I've spoken to for the past several years. And it's actually great because it's not just him sitting down and waiting for me to talk, because I will sit there for 30 minutes and not say anything. We actually have a dialogue and have a conversation, you know, where he knows my family well enough where we're just talking and having a conversation is great, because that allows me to actually just bring up certain things that I know I'll never talk about with anyone. And because he's a guy, it actually made me feel comfortable having actually sharing certain things that I want to share with my female therapist, that I think I've had more female therapists than male. And for speaking to this gentleman now, it actually has made me feel much comfortable. And he's also a Black guy. So when I have certain conversations with him, it also talks about where I've come from, as someone that's from Jamaica, as a, you know, as a male, like all these different things that really allows me to feel like I'm being listened to. So that whole perspective changes actually has, I would say, helped the therapy that I've been receiving now. And I'm not going to discount the others that I've spoken to. It was just, you know, time where you just get to one person where you could say, wow, you know, this is really great, and I could really understand the great things that they're saying to me, and feel like, you know, you could leave that day and connect with them the next week because you're not going to feel all jittery and like, oh my gosh, what can I say to them? Actually, I feel comfortable, which is a rarity for me to actually feel comfortable with anybody in the medical field.
So basically what Gavin's saying is more men are needed in the
Yes.
medical field and in mental health. I get that a lot with my veterans, that I feel, especially the older Vietnam generation, they just feel more comfortable with a man. They feel as if they're speaking to their granddaughter and they're just not here for it, which I could totally respect. Gender is something that is a preference, whether it's civilian or veteran based, and having a male is something that's, I think, super important. One thing I will say about being a veteran who's a clinician, and I have felt or heard from my guys, if they have shame, or if they have a dishonorable discharge, or if they have, you know, a rocky military experience, a lot of the times it's harder for them to disclose because they feel they're being judged, right? Because they know that I know what is good, what is right from wrong, or, oh, you got out as a PFC, you know, that type of culture, I think, can also be a hindrance to why people don't want a veteran as their counselor, because they might be afraid of being judged. So they like having a civilian because they don't have to really go into the nuances of everything. But for those who feel they want to be seen and heard through their experiences, I have felt being a veteran clinician and having my veterans, the rapport is built a lot faster, and we can really deep dive into things they want to work with, because we don't have to spend a lot of time of getting to know each other and them explaining the things that are hard to explain or just take a long time. And So I'm grateful for both the males in this field and for veteran clinicians and civilians who work as well.
Any other comments on that one? All right, any other questions from our attendees today? There was one comment. This has been one of the most realistic workshops I've attended. Thanks so much for sharing your stories. It's sad that you are giving your life to protect our nation and you were abused instead of being honored. I just wanted to read that one. I thought that was really well said.
I have a question regarding a similar panel for law enforcement departments. I think that, you know, myself as a retired New York City police officer, you know, there's a lot of sexual assault trauma, and female officers, just like myself, have a hard time seeking assistance, more because it's, you know, it's your job. And similarly, as you know, military personnel, you know, you seek services. It's very hard because you know, you're kind of having to choose. Um, you know, do you report someone who may have your career in his hands or her hands? And you know, a lot of women don't want to report it. So I think that just like you're doing a panel here, and a lot of people in the chat are resonating and sharing their stories, I always feel that panelists is kind of like a way to get people to talk about it and to, you know, have training, you know, for police departments as well, because I think that, you know, it's very hard to talk about this topic. And, you know, and I just want to share a feedback with Gavin because I think that your story really, really is touching. My nephew too suffered from trauma, was in the military and the Navy, and he's now a social worker because he also didn't feel that there was male, you know, he's half African American and half Puerto Rican, but he didn't feel comfortable sharing his story to just a female. And so for him, being, you know, going to back to school and getting his MSW was a passion of his, so that he can also help veterans who are suffering from trauma but are hidden behind the shadows of, you know, racism, because that's also what he fears. So it resonated with me, everything that you guys are saying, because I think it's important and we need to be more in these spaces. And so I just want to commend you for sharing the stories, but how do you see yourself in other spaces? Because sometimes we're not going to get invited to these spaces, right? They're not going to say, come here and talk. But what do you think about being in those spaces?
You know, I think the conversation is across the board. Like we're just focusing on military now, but I think if we go in any space, anybody, like you said, will can identify with it, because no matter what, I think we all have the same stories. It's just how, you know, how the story ends for a lot of us, whether it's suicide, homelessness, you know, divorce, whatever it is, you know, all those things lead to it started from somewhere. And I think a lot of us can identify with that. Like for me, um I sometimes joke about you know, having a black therapist now, because I'm like, I never thought about it ever. You know, I've always said, listen, I'm just gonna go to therapy just to go to therapy so I could feel better. And lo and behold, I was like, wow, you know, if I just had chosen someone that would, you know, that understood me in the beginning, probably I wouldn't have went through all the situations that I've experienced. Because for me, you know, just to be able to share my story a lot of times is the hardest thing. And my wife knows that I don't like talking to her about certain things. And a lot of people know I probably won't like talking to her about certain things. Like I'm more of a listener than a talker. That's why I think I'm a good clinician when I talk to folks, because I tend to listen more. But most importantly, I think you know, if we could be in any space where someone will listen, we could actually just have the conversation to educate others too. So I always love to talk to anybody that's willing to listen. I know all of us will actually love to talk to anybody that listen, because at the end of the day, we all went through something that could be similar or whatever it is. But as long as everybody knows that there's an opportunity for them to create that space for themselves, you know, it's absolutely important, because you know, law enforcement could create their own peer-to-peer across the board, where it's just peer-to-peer for law enforcement or first responders, just having those connections, like how the Dwyer program is in New York State. Like all these different things can just transition into something else that could empower somebody else. So we'll love whatever conversation that will lead to somebody saying, yes, how can I start this in our organization? Or yes, how can I start this in my department? Or yes, how can I start this in my agency? Because it's helping you guys as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gavin. Good question. So last question, some of Alyssa, I know you addressed it in the chat box too, but have any of you found speaking with military chaplains to be helpful? And if so, did the gender of the chaplain matter?
So I actually, when I was a cadet, there was a female chaplain who was sort of an advocate at the time. And in a system where no one reported unless they were going to quit, she was sort of a sounding board for a lot of cadets, to have somewhere safe to go to talk to, even not to talk, just to have someone safe who understood and would hold space. And she is still a staunch advocate for changes in policy and fighting for the change that needs to happen to make the whole disability process not as traumatic. So she is, yeah, I did find her very helpful. I did also speak to a male chaplain at the time who I found very helpful. Chaplain Puerta was our rabbi at West Point, and I was in the Jewish choir. And so he was very helpful in just, again, holding space and being someone I could scream into the void with without feeling judged. So I think it really depends on the chaplain, but I have run into a couple really good ones in my time.
Has anyone else had experience with this? No pressure if not. All right, I think that the only other question that came in that I saw was just disclosure to families, and a couple of you answered it in the chat. But I know that that is a difficult one. Disclosure to families, friends, in relationships. You know, we don't have too much time left to delve into this, probably to the level it deserves, but can maybe just touch on that, like what that's like, and if that's something that maybe how do you determine?
Rough. It's very rough. Maylee talks about her divorces. I'm on divorce number 3. Gavin has a healthy, romantic relationship and family and marriage, and he is just someone we look to and say, one day. It's really rough. I had a specific relationship, my specific experience, because we were both MPs. My ex-husband at the time, he was the one who made me report 3 years later, because he was like, I disclosed to him, and he was a sergeant, and he felt, you know, it's his duty. So I didn't even at that time, like, you know, I wasn't ready to report, but he felt that I had to, and I at the time was very, very distraught, and I felt he chose the Army over his wife. But years later, when I was fighting for 8 long years for my disability, that report was something that they were able to find, and I was used as evidence. So it did help me in the end, but reporting to anyone is just really difficult. And relationships, sexual intercourse is incredibly hard. The trust, the intimacy that you have with people is a whole nother subject that we could spend a long time on too. Not just relationships, but the intimacy part is something you really have to work on.
I will jump in here real quick. When I decided to file my disability claim, I actually came out very publicly with my story. It was published in a local newspaper. Which started a whole chain of events that I didn't understand was going to happen. CID got involved. They opened a whole investigation. They came to my job to interview me. Thankfully, I work in mental health and I have a great support system at work because my entire team was outside the door ready to come and hug me when I was done. But I took that newspaper and I handed it to my mom and I handed it to my boyfriend, and I was like, okay, this is what I am going through on a daily basis. I live with this every day, and it tempers the decisions I make, the reactions I have, the life that I live. And as people who are going to be in my life long term, like, you should have some understanding of what I go through and what makes me the way that I am now, because I am not the same person I was before. So yeah, I came out really publicly with my story, and my family was like, okay. My mom has been super supportive. She knew something had happened to me when I was there anyway, so she was right on for being, my mom is amazing, and so she was great. My dad was going through some health struggles, and my dad has always been very proud of my accomplishments and my military career and school and everything. And so we just didn't want to take that from him when he was going through some health stuff. And he recently passed. So he did pass without knowing. But that was a choice that we made.
Yeah, I have to say that for me, I'm afraid to talk to my wife about it because I feel that she's gonna one, try to have a conversation about it, that I don't want to, and two, I feel like she will understand because I'm in a great relationship now, but the reason why I'm in a great relationship now is because I keep so much things away from her regarding how I feel sometime and where my mind is. And before I ever got in a relationship with her, I was in horrible relationships where I felt that everybody that I was with was judging me. Like every single moment, there was just judging me. And I actually had timelines on when I was going to be breaking up with a person because I felt like that was the timeline that I'm supposed to break it up with a person. Like every relationship, I said, okay, we're going to be together for the next month or 3 months. And for me, that felt better than the person knowing what I experienced. Like I was in a relationship where it felt so great. I'm like, yeah, this is perfect. And then I slowly started to tell them what was going on, and I could see something change as I was telling them. I'm like, no, I don't think I want to be in a relationship anymore because just from their expression, their response, I don't think it's going to work out. And it was, I think it's been pretty difficult. My parents and family still don't know what happened to me as a child, um, and they don't know the reason why I was so adamant about coming back to the house when all of this was happening. For me, I don't want to create a bad relationship in the family dynamic overall because I'm like, hey, everybody's happy now. Let them be happy and let me be happy in my little world right now because my world is already feeling good. So there's that whole separation of like who should know and who shouldn't know. And this is one place I do share, but everybody else will not know because I don't feel like they understand and can be empathetic to what I've experienced. Because for me, I'm like, hey, a guy shouldn't go through a situation like that as a young child, especially someone that trusts everybody and felt like as a family member they shouldn't do that to you. Yeah.
Gavin, did you see someone asked about being Caribbean, if that affected you?
Yeah, a lot because for my family, they're strong. They did everything, And I felt embarrassed if I talked about it. I felt like I was going to be ridiculed. I thought it was going to be more trauma on top of the trauma that I've already experienced. At, I think, 16 years old, I actually hung myself in my living room, and my cousin came downstairs, uh, saw me. I wasn't successful in it because it just broke. The belt broke, and then later on that day, my father. I think I shared this before. My father said you should have went in the basement and did it, and I was like, yeah, you're absolutely right. I should have went down there because I could have did it again and nobody was going to be around. So for me, it's hard to talk to people about it because all my perception is that no one's going to understand, and for what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna think it's worth it. My thought process, my father in back of my head saying that you can't do this. You couldn't be successful killing your own self. You couldn't be successful with this and that. So I've carried so much weight for this long that at times I feel like I shouldn't have talked to the people that has been close to me enough to understand what I'm experiencing. So no, family doesn't really know, and I don't think family will actually understand from my perception or perspective.
It's really hard to tell family though, because I don't know, you said Caribbean, but I know Latinos, they tend to either overreact or they want to, be vigilantes, or they just want to totally ignore it. And they tell you there's other people that will help you deal with that. I know for me, when I mentioned it to my husband, he didn't want to hear it. He didn't want to talk about it. He just ignored it. And then later on when I started to search for help, he was very supportive with that. He doesn't want to discuss it. And I think for him, it's more like he knew me as a kid and he knew that I was in the Marine Corps. And I think he just feels guilty that he couldn't, protect me from that, and what I'm feeling and all that. And I think that, that's like that male perspective of protector. Um, and he already feels like, being that I was in the Marine Corps and that, I do so much stuff on my own, and, I'm so independent that from him that he's not able to help in any way. So there's that. And then my dad, I didn't mention it to him. He knew something happened, because he would see signs of the way I brought up my daughter and how I was so overprotective of her. And he knew something happened, but he didn't bring up the subject. Um, but later on, he told me, after my daughter was an adult, he said, something happened to you when you were away. And it has shown in the way that you have lived your life and have made, um, he also mentioned that that's the reason probably why I allowed myself to get overweight, that something happened that I felt I needed to change or protect myself. So I think people notice, but I think, you know, if they're uncomfortable with the subject matter, they're not going to bring it up or pry. So for me, therapy was the best, and peer mentoring was the best. And actually, when it happened, I didn't want to say anything because my dad is a very violent man. Well, was a very violent man, and I would be afraid. I'm sure of it. I'm sure he would have gotten in his car, drove to Virginia, and probably killed somebody. You know, but that's the background I come from. So yeah.
Thank you all for your comments and different but deep perspectives. I think that's what these are all about. And thank you for the attendees who asked wonderful questions, very thoughtful and considerate. And the comments were, I mean, they were flooded in. People said this was like the best workshop they've ever attended. So really such an important topic. And I just want to say it's hard to talk about this stuff, especially when you've experienced it. And you're also eloquent in the way that you describe these like really difficult concepts. So just, you know, I'm always floored by all of you. So thank you for doing this. It's I learned a lot as well. I really appreciate all of you, and I'm going to turn it back to Amelia to just recap the CEU process. And thank you to NASW.
I, of course, echo everything that Anissa just said, and everyone in the comments can say it better than I can. And I hope that the panelists have an opportunity to look through the hundreds and hundreds of comments and thanks from everyone who was in attendance today. We had at some points over 300 unique users here with us, or unique people in here with us. I say users in the reports. So I am going to throw in, while we're right here, the evaluation link. If you want to have that, you want to be able to grab that and start filling that out. I just put it in the chat box, and I'll put it in a few more times. I want to reiterate that so after this program closes, I can't send this email until after the program closes. You will get an evaluation link to the email that you registered with. You must complete the evaluation by this upcoming Thursday, October 19th, to receive your CE certificate. You will receive the CE certificate within 10 days of this program today. It will be in a downloadable PDF. We send it as a PDF because if you ever have to submit your information to SAD, they're going to request it as a PDF. So that's the way we send it. So again, I'm putting the evaluation link if you want to click it right now and start filling that out. It's going to take about 5 to 10 minutes to get the email from Constant Contact to the email that you registered with. But I promise it's coming. I promise it's coming. And if you have any questions, feel free to email us and I'll make sure to get that to you directly. But thank you again, all of our panelists. This was an incredible panel, very powerful. Thank you for your time, and I hope everyone has a beautiful rest of your day.
Thank you. Love you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye, friends.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you all.